Welcome back to this next video in which we are discussing the thyroid gland. Okay, so we've now discussed the synthesis and secretion of thyroid hormones. We've also discussed the effects of the thyroid hormones on the peripheral tissues of the body. What I want to do in this next video is discuss the control of the release of thyroid hormones, which is the topic of the hypothalamic-Pituitary-Thyroid axis. Okay, so we've talked about how the thyroid gland is going to try and maintain a constant level of thyroid hormones within the bloodstream. And to do this, it's going to need to tailor the amount of thyroid hormones that it is synthesizing and secreting to the concentration within the bloodstream. Now, of course, the simple thing would be if the thyroid gland did this job for itself, i.e. it measured the amount of thyroid hormones in the bloodstream and then use that to determine how much thyroid hormones it was actually going to synthesize. However, that's not what happens, and you can sort of come up with reasons for why that would be an unsensible thing to, or an unfeasible thing to actually have, because of course by the thyroid follicular cells you're going to have very high concentrations of thyroid hormones because they are releasing them into the extracellular fluid surrounding them, so they're not really going to have an accurate picture of what the thyroid hormone level in the bloodstream actually is. Okay, so instead what's going to happen is structures far, far away from the thyroid gland, namely the hypothalamus and the pituitary, are going to measure the level of thyroid hormones within the blood, and they then are going to communicate this information down to the thyroid gland and tell the thyroid gland how much thyroid hormones it should be releasing from the information about the level of the thyroid hormones within the bloodstream. Okay, so what I'm now going to do then is tell you about this chain of structure telling structure what to do. So the hypothalamus is going to send information to the pituitary, which is going to send information to the thyroid about what to do. So the hypothalamus controls how much of a signaling molecule is released by the pituitary, which then controls the thyroid gland. Okay, so let me start off by talking about where the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland actually are. Then I'll describe to you the signaling from the hypothalamus to the pituitary to the thyroid, and then we'll put it all together into the negative feedback system that is going to control the level of thyroid hormones within the bloodstream. Okay, so to begin with a little bit of neuroanatomy then. So, where is the hypothalamus and where is the pituitary? Well, I think the best way to do this is to assume that you know no neuroanatomy and just do it from the foundations upwards. So I'm going to start by drawing a very basic picture that I assume everyone will be familiar with, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so the very basic picture that I'm going to start off with is just what you would see if you were looking at someone's brain from, let's say, the left-hand side. Okay, so I'll draw the left cerebral hemisphere then to start with, viewed from the left side. So here we go. I'm sure you will have seen something like this before. So this is the left cerebral hemisphere, and then poking out from underneath the left cerebral hemisphere you're going to have little portions of the brain stem, which is the continuation of the spinal cord in the skull. Okay, and also sitting behind the brainstem and underneath the cerebral hemisphere here, you'll have the cerebellum. Okay, and then once the brainstem passes out of the skull, it then becomes the spinal cord. So let me just label up the different parts that I've got here. So down here, this is the spinal cord, and I'll just colour everything in. So this portion is outside of the skull then, and it's within the vertebral column, but of course it's still part of the central nervous system because the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. So here, this is the hole in the base of the skull known as the foramen magnum, through which the spinal cord passes. So this is representing the foramen, which just means hole in Latin, and then magnum just means big, so the big hole at the base of the skull. So it all makes sense. Then once the spinal cord has passed through the foramen magnum, it becomes the brainstem. So the brainstem is just a term meaning the continuation, effectively, of the spinal cord. And we can see two components of the brainstem here. So this one, the first portion, once you've gone through the foramen magnum, the first portion of the brainstem that you arrive at is what's known as the medulla. Okay, so this little portion is representing the medulla, and I'll colour this in. So in red here, that's the medulla. Then after the medulla, or above the medulla, if you continue on upwards, you're going to reach the pons, and that's the next portion that is visible to us. And I'll colour in the pons in blue here. Now the pons is not the final portion of the brainstem. There is one more portion of the brainstem that's above the pons, but we can't see it in this picture because it's covered up by the cerebral hemispheres. Okay, right. Then some more portions on here. So this portion back here is of course the cerebellum, meaning the little brain, which is very important in the motor system. It's very important in calibrating movements. So what I mean by that is if you need to do a very fine movement like catching a ball, so you have to take in all of this complicated visual information about where the ball is and how it's moving, and you have to somehow come up with this incredibly calibrated movement where you're moving your muscles to the exact right amounts to get your hands in the correct position to catch the ball. That's an incredibly difficult thing to actually do if you think about it. Okay, the cerebellum is very important in doing that. Okay, so very important in the motor system, in calibrating using visual information to calibrate incredibly fine movements that need to be very precise. Okay, and this big yellow bit is of course the cerebral hemispheres. Or in this case we're looking at the left cerebral hemisphere, but of course on the right there will be another one. Okay, and that does everything else basically. So loads of different functions, the cerebral hemispheres. Okay, right, so there is a picture that I'm sure you will have seen before and you will be familiar with of the brain. What I am now going to do is I'm going to remove the cerebral hemispheres. I'm also going to remove the cerebellum, we don't need that. And I'm just going to continue the brainstem upwards, and we're going to see other structures that are after the brainstem, which we can't see on this picture because they're all at the centre of the cerebral hemisphere, so they're all covered up by this stuff here. So we want to remove all of the cerebral hemisphere, the main portion of the brain, and just look at the structures, the nuclei that are in the centre of that. Okay, so I'm now going to continue the brainstem onwards, and we will find things like the thalamus, or the thalami rather, because there are actually two thalami, a left and a right one, and we will find the hypothalamus and also the pituitary gland. Okay, so picture number 2, I'll continue on with this, so the spinal cord, the medulla and the pons, so here we go, and I'll draw it bigger actually now, go here. Okay, so let's have this as the spinal cord here. Then we'll have the medulla here, and bear with me whilst I draw this because I want the picture to be decent. Then we'll have the pons here, above the medulla, and now we're going to see the next portion of the brainstem above the pons, which is the midbrain, which has a pretty boring appearance if you view it from the side. If you view it from above, if you were to take a transverse section or you were to look down from above, it looks really interesting, it looks like Mickey Mouse, but from the side it looks very boring. Now, sitting on top of the midbrain then, you have a portion that is not the brainstem. So this is the end of the brainstem now, and I'll actually just colour in the bits again. So here we have the medulla. I won't bother relabeling it up, but I will colour code it. Here is the pons, and then the final third component then of the brainstem is this portion here, which I'll have in yellow, which is the midbrain. So these are the 3 parts of the brainstem then. So this is the midbrain. Right, and now sitting on top of the midbrain we're going to have the 2 thalami. So on the left side of the midbrain you're going to have the left thalamus sitting on top. On the right side of the midbrain you're going to have the right thalamus sitting on top. Of course we are looking from the left hand side, so we're just going to see the left thalamus. And the thalami, they kind of look like eggs, okay? Like so. So here is the left thalamus looking like an egg perched on top of the left side of the midbrain, but you'd have another one and they'd be symmetrically positioned around the midline. Okay, so we'll have the thalamus then shown here in green, and the thalamus is really the gateway up to the cerebral hemispheres. Loads of inputs coming in, they all go to the thalamus, synapse there, and then the information is sent on up to the cerebral hemispheres. Okay, so this is the left thalamus. I'll put an L there for left. So that's the left thalamus, and now we're going to put on the hypothalamus then. So the hypothalamus extends forward from the thalami here, and the midbrain forwards here, and I will draw you another picture in a moment to explain how the thalamus actually works, because of course you'll be thinking, so is it going to extend forward from the left thalamus or is it extending forward from the right thalamus? And it extends forward from both, but there is a gap down the middle, and I'll show you that gap in a moment. So this is what it will look like from the left hand side. Don't worry about what's actually happening if you were to look from above. We'll do that picture in a moment. So from the left hand side, just try and understand this picture for now. This is what you would see. Here is this hypothalamus, which for now is just a block of neural tissue. Then we've got down here the optic chiasm actually here, which is the crossover of neurons from the two optic nerves. Then we've got the pituitary stalk here going down to the pituitary gland, and of course you've got two parts of the pituitary gland, the anterior pituitary gland and the posterior pituitary gland. You've got a little prominence on the back which we'll name in a moment called the median eminence, and then you've got two little prominences on either side at the bottom here known as the mammillary bodies. Okay, right. So let's label up the different portions then here, and I'll just make sure this is all straight. Yeah. So this is the hypothalamus, and this is the pituitary gland here. This structure on this edge of the hypothalamus here, this is called the optic chiasm, and that's the crossover of the optic nerves. So that's hopefully sort of orients you as to where we are. So forwards from this you'll have the two optic nerves coming off. Okay. These structures here are known as the mammillary bodies. We can only see one, but there's one on both sides, so there's a left one and a right one. Okay, so this one is, and I'm unwilling to use this information for this, but never mind. Missed out an M there. How am I going to correct this? Left mammillary body. Or you could also call it the left mammillary nucleus, whatever you prefer. So there would be another one, and I think I'll actually, since I've got so much space, I'll actually put in left there. So this is the left mammillary body. Okay, but there would be one on the right side as well. So if you were to look from underneath, you'd see a left one to the left of the midline, and you'd see a right one to the right of the midline. Okay, so it would be symmetric along the midline, just like the thalami are symmetric along the midline. Now there is only one pituitary stalk, and there is only one eminence that, this is all down in the midline, so this pituitary stalk will be along the midline between the two mammillary bodies, and there's only one eminence from the back here, and this is actually going to be very important in our story, otherwise I wouldn't even bother drawing it on, but this is the median eminence of the pituitary stalk here. So that's going to be very important. That's going to be one of the portions of the hypothalamus that is extremely important in controlling the release of the hormone that's going to control the thyroid gland from the pituitary. Okay, so then down here we have the two parts of the pituitary gland, the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. So this is the pituitary gland. Okay, the anterior portion and the posterior, and for us the portion that's going to be important is the anterior pituitary, so we're not going to be interested at all in the posterior pituitary, we're just going to focus on the anterior pituitary gland. I'll also just underline optic chiasm there in yellow. Then all of the rest of this is just hypothalamus. The mammillary bodies are also part of the hypothalamus. All of this is just hypothalamus. This sort of stalk down is known as the pituitary stalk. Okay, so that's, I think, all I'll label up on this picture. What I now want to do then, and I think I should probably just put the title hypothalamus, so all of this is the hypothalamus. What I'd like to do now is draw you another picture of the hypothalamus, where we're going to now look from above, because we're going to get a lot of insight by looking from above. So what I want to now do is draw you a picture from above, because the hypothalamus is not just one solid mass. It's not the case that if I was to take a knife and start poking it through from the left-hand side, that I would just have a solid mass all the way through to the right border of the hypothalamus. No, there is a hole in the middle. It's hollow. And this is continuous with the hole in between the two thalami, and this is known as the third ventricle. So what I'm now going to do is draw you a picture looking down from above. So here then we have the two thalami. So this is the right thalamus, and this one here is the left thalamus, like so. And then the hypothalamus is going to extend forward from the two, like this. It's going to form a sheet of neural tissue, like so. Okay, so this is the side we were seeing previously when we were looking from the left-hand side. This is what we were seeing. We were just seeing this portion here, and of course this was the thalamus we were seeing, the left thalamus here. Okay, we were not seeing all of this portion. We were just assuming that this was just one great solid mass. We didn't realise from this picture that there was this hole in the middle here. So you have the left side of the hypothalamus and the right side of the hypothalamus. But you don't talk about having two hypothalami. There is only one hypothalamus. You have just a left side of it and a right side of it, like analogous to how we had a left lobe and a right lobe to the thyroid gland, and we didn't talk about having two thyroid glands. Okay, so you have two thalami, only one hypothalamus, just with two sides. Okay, and this chamber, which is full of cerebrospinal fluid that is in between the two thalami and also in between the two sides of the hypothalamus, this is known as the third ventricle. Okay, and it is, as I say, full of cerebrospinal fluid. Right, okay, so that's the picture from above then to explain the fact that there is a right and left side to the hypothalamus. What I now want to imagine doing is taking a cross-section through the hypothalamus. What I want to do is now take a sagittal section, so take a great knife and cut down. So here is the knife, cut down through the hypothalamus, and we'll stop drawing all of these structures. We'll just draw the hypothalamus now. And what I will cut through is I will no longer see the mammillary bodies, because remember, those are on either side. They'll be like this, okay, remember? So there's a left mammillary body and a right mammillary body protruding down from the floor of the hypothalamus, like so. So we won't anymore see those because we're cutting down perfectly in the midline. But what we will see is we'll cut through the pituitary stalk, we'll cut through the anterior and posterior pituitary, and we will see still the median eminence because that's right in the midline. So what we'll end up with is a picture that looks like this. Okay, and of course we'll also see the third ventricle. So we'll just see the outer portion of the hypothalamus, basically the walls and floor. Okay, so here is the optic chiasm still, because of course that goes through the midline. That goes, if I draw this on that picture, so here is the optic chiasm with the optic nerves coming off on either side. So it would be underneath this portion here, okay, like so. And then you'd have the optic tracts going back behind. So these are the two optic nerves, left optic nerve, right optic nerve, the optic chiasm, the right optic tract and the left optic tract here. Okay, right, so we would be cutting still through the optic chiasm there. Then what we'd see is the pituitary stalk here with the anterior pituitary, the posterior pituitary. Here is the median eminence, and there's the rest of the hypothalamus. Now we'd also see the third ventricle, and this is why we've done this really, to get this understanding of how the third ventricle works. The third ventricle, as you can see, projects down into the pituitary stalk here for a little bit, and it will go off like this. So if I just colour in the third ventricle in a certain colour, so we'll have this third ventricle coloured in yellow here, so that's all the third ventricle. Okay, and the important thing that I want you to see here is this median eminence. Right, so I think that now concludes my discussion of the anatomy of the hypothalamus. I hope you sort of understand the structure of the hypothalamus now, and we're now going to actually look at the role of the hypothalamus in controlling secretion of thyroid hormones. Okay, so to summarise, what's going to happen is certain portions of the hypothalamus, including this median eminence, which is why I've stressed it so much, and another structure that I haven't shown you yet, but I will show you, are going to shout down to cells in the anterior pituitary to, in turn, shout down to the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormones. That's the overall mechanism that's going to occur here. So let's actually talk about the structures that are going to command over the anterior pituitary. So here we have the median eminence, which is made up of some of these cells that are going to release a molecule to command over the anterior pituitary. So this is the median eminence here, and I'll just underline that in red. And there's a bunch of cells that are very close to the median eminence, which are going to be neuroendocrine cells. They're going to be neurons which are capable of releasing certain proteinergic molecules. that are also going to do the same thing with regards to controlling the thyroid gland. And this nucleus of the hypothalamus is known as the arcuate nucleus. Okay, and the arcuate nucleus is going to be in this sort of position here, and the reason it's called an arcuate nucleus, of course arc means a portion of a circle, is that it's going to arc around this portion of the third ventricle that extends into the pituitary stalk. So if you imagine having a sort of arc of tissue coming around like that, so probably the best way to show this is actually with another picture. If I was to take a transverse cross-section through the pituitary stalk, then I might see something like this. Okay, here is the median eminence on the back, like so. Here is the third ventricle in the middle. Okay, so covering this in, here is the third ventricle going down the middle. There's the median eminence on the back. And now the arcuate nucleus is going to be an arc of tissue that sort of goes around the third ventricle in the middle of the pituitary stalk, like so. So here it is, like so. So this is the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus. Like so. So this is called the... Oh, I've already written it down, but here is it written down again, the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus. And the arcuate nucleus and median eminence are going to do the same thing with regards to controlling the thyroid gland. Okay, so both of these areas of the hypothalamus then, they contain neurons that are going to be neuroendocrine neurons. So neuroendocrine neurons are of course neurons which release hormones. So endocrine means hormones that are going to be secreted into the bloodstream. Okay, so these cells then are going to release a molecule which is going to go down to the anterior pituitary and tell the cells in the anterior pituitary to in turn tell the thyroid gland cells, the thyroid follicular cells, to synthesize and secrete T3 and T4 thyroid hormones. Okay, so let's actually talk about what they're going to release then. So the neurons in these areas are going to release a molecule known as TRH, which stands for thyrotropin releasing hormone. So the T is for thyrotropin, and then the RH is for releasing hormone. Okay? And this is going to go down to the cells of the anterior pituitary and tell them to release thyrotropin, and thyrotropin is one of the names for the molecule that the anterior pituitary cells can release to tell thyroid follicular cells to release T3 and T4. So thyrotropin releasing hormone is going to be the molecule that the cells of the arcuate nucleus and the median eminence release to command the cells in the anterior pituitary. I think we'll have a break here, and in the next video what we'll talk about is how the thyrotropin releasing hormone is actually going to get down to the cells of the anterior pituitary, which cells of the anterior pituitary thyrotropin releasing hormone is actually going to act on, and what those cells in turn are going to release into the bloodstream to have an effect on the thyroid follicular cells.